Good morning, Mr. Seeklander.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm outstanding.
Like, are you actually outstanding, or are you just making that up? Is that just your initial show start? Like, I'm fantastic. I'm better than I deserve. I'm outstanding. Or are you really, truly outstanding?
I'm really not. Yesterday was leg day, and my legs are freaking still trembling.
Really? Are you're doing legs?
Yeah.
Dude,
Yeah.
so tell me about, I got to ask. Tell me, I'm going to turn my volume up just a hair. Folks, good morning. We're live right now. Rich Brown, tell me about leg day before we start the show.
Leg extensions, leg press, hamstring curls, and that's about it. But normally I go pretty light, and I was working out with my son-in-law yesterday, and that guy's a beast of a leg guy, so it was not fun.
Where are you guys working out at?
The choices here in Crossville are pretty slim, so it's Planet Fitness.
Oh, nice. Well, that's cool, man.
Which is kind of crappy, but it is what it is.
All right, man. Well, good morning, folks. We are live on the Facebook and everything else, which probably nobody got notified like always. I don't know if I see any comments yet, but we at least are in theory live. And of course, if you're listening to me right now, you are listening to Mike Seeklander and Mr. Rich Brown of the American Warrior Show, the podcast of the American Warrior Society. Rich, I want to say real quick, so I don't have to say it in the pre-show, we do have a website, and if folks want to get on and check out the show notes pages for all of your previous fantastic guests, or me, or whatever else, you can go to AmericanWarriorShow.com. Also, a lot of folks jump on the email and ask us about the discount codes and the product discounts and the products that we mentioned, like Precision Holsters and Works Holsters and Mountain Man Medical and all these different sponsors we have listed. They're all listed on the website, and all of their discount codes are there as well. So if you're looking for those discount codes, please check out the American Warrior Show website. And last but not least, if you're on the website and you check out the show notes pages are kind of unique in that they're individual shows. So if you're just searching for one particular show and you want to share it with your friend, well, you can search for that show and you can see a picture of the guest and oftentimes the guest's website or some of the details about the guest that we've had on or whatever else. So good morning, folks. Rich Brown, I guess we're going to cover some optic related stuff this morning, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Even though that's not really my thing. And I want to go back to the working out deal, because I never have enjoyed lifting weights like you have. The entire 30 years I've known you, I think you've always been a gym rat, and that's just never appealed to me. Well, I guess probably for the last 2 months, I've got back into it because it's one of those things, and this is why I'm bringing it up again. And it's in a time like we're in right now, with November the 5th hanging over everybody's head, and nobody knows what's going to happen. It's like, oh, what do I do? And I feel this anxiety and blah, blah, blah. Well, what you can do is take care of your body. And I think that was what I came to. Like, well, what can Rich Brown do right now? I'm going to the range, I'm training, I'm doing all this. Okay, get your fitness where it needs to be, get your blood pressure where it needs to be, get your diet where it needs. These are things that you can do, and you'll feel like you have a sense of control. What do you think, Mike?
No, actually, I'm proud of you, man. And I mean, you're not people. You may say that, but you're no stranger to fitness. But unfortunately, for those that don't know the background and haven't read your book, I mean, you were very much forced into fitness in the Marine Corps methodology, which was tall, long-legged, lanky guys that would run miles and miles and miles. And that was their version of fitness. That was the Marine Corps version of fitness. If you were, a 220-pound bone-crushing guy like I was in the Marine Corps, big, muscular, strong, but you had a 1.5% over the body fat in theory limit, which was the measurements they used to use was completely baloney. You were out of shape, or you were put on weight control and all this different stuff, which is completely ridiculous, because I hate to say it, and I love you long-legged captains out there that can run for 19 miles, but man, most of you are probably going to get bent up like a freaking pretzel in an actual fight, and not all of you, so please don't come beat my old butt down. But the bottom line is, you were forced into fitness, so I'm happy to hear that, man, because as you know, dude, like being here at 7:30 a.m., I'm already slightly irritable because I miss my morning workout. And it's not about being a gym rat. Like you said, man, you mentioned your blood pressure or your whatever else. I don't know if you saw this, Rich, but I just wrote an article on the shooting performance page on practical shooting. It's a practical shooting fitness program. And that's kind of a play on words, like like almost clickbait, because all these shooters are like, well, what fitness program should we do for practical shooting? Well, in reality, there isn't one. There are some things you can focus on that will make you potentially a better practical shooter and defender, right? Both, because they're the same thing, speed and accuracy at a very high level. But it's a very detailed article in what I'm doing in my fitness right now. And I would hope that as you're lifting, and anybody listening right now is thinking about this, that you're not skipping your conditioning sessions, because that's one thing I've changed over the last several years, 3 or 4 years, is I front load every single workout with conditioning of some sort. So it might be long. We've talked about this: long, slow. It might be intermediate intervals, which are a little bit less intense, but a little bit longer for a little bit more VO2 work. It might be shorter in bouts of intense intervals, 30-second workload. But I do that, and then I do some sort of strength or hypertrophy work or whatever at the back end. And Rich, I literally feel better than I ever have in years. So consider that. If you haven't seen that article, you should check that out. And folks, if you're listening right now, get on Shooting Dash Performance and go to the articles at the bottom of the page, and you can check that out. I think it's a well-written article for a guy who's not a full-time fitness trainer. I did have Jake Sines, our buddy over at Atomic Athlete, review it, and he's like, man, it's good to go. It's a good initial rough program. So
I think that's your point about programming, and I'm not there yet on programming. I think I'm just 2 months into it, just getting the rust off and getting a good strength base back. And I had to be, you're paid for your physical performance in the Marine Corps for 23 years. That was part of, your job as somewhat of a professional athlete. And I don't know, I always had a problem with that. But I think, to your point, a functional fitness strength that has a purpose to it, besides just being able to roll somebody up like a burrito, and the explosiveness that, you've always had on demand to come, to go from one stage to another. I was watching you running your PCC work from position to position, and again, a guy that's had 2 hips replaced, your ability to explode off the line and get into that next position quickly and get the gun up. It's something I was actually wanting to talk to you about today, PCC, but I think we say that for another show, because that needs to be all on its own. And fitness needs to be too, Mike. But today we want to talk about optics, right?
Yeah, we do. And I'm glad you saw that video, because it's funny you say that. And if you're listening right now, that was an Instagram post. I also posted on Livefire. I will tell you that my ability to move like that comes from those conditioning sessions in the morning. And so let me describe it to you and the listener, Rich, real quick, and then we can jump into optics. And optics is going to kind of be we're going to banter about optics on handguns, and I'm going to talk about some of the things I see in my classes that students are making mistakes on. So that's what you have kind of to look forward to in this show. This is a great show if you're driving along. You don't need to necessarily watch the video, although I do have some demo guns that we'll utilize, so if you get a chance to watch the video later on. But Rich, when I started doing these conditioning sessions, and when my conditioning is primarily on the Echo bike and on a stationary bike, but when I'm doing them, I'm doing 3-minute lengths. So let's just say I'm doing zone 2 cardio, I may be on the bike or the Echo bike for 3 minutes, forward pedaling, reverse pedaling, whatever else. And on the next 3 minutes, I'm doing something that keeps my heart rate in the same zone. Now, it may be PCC transitions, where I'm literally getting nice, wide, and aggressive, and I'm working on transitions. It might be handgun transitions. It might be shooting on the move. It might be a short movement burst left and right. And this is all done in a 3-minute window. And if my heart rate gets too high, I have the Morpheus device that tells me, it goes beep, 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 and tells me, hey, I'm outside of the window that I set that morning. But that conditioning, what I'm trying to say is, when you're working on things at a very methodical pace over and over, daily and weekly and monthly, over and over, a bunch of things happen. Number one, I'm not really worried about my Achilles or my calves or anything anymore, because I'm constantly putting stress on them. I'm constantly working them. I'm doing things that keep them very, very healthy. Well, so when I watched myself move the other day, I'm like, I don't know if people realize that I have 2 total hip replacements and I'm 53 years old to move as well as my 30-year-old training partner does, who's very fast on his feet. I was actually impressed by myself when I watched the video. And it's all about what I'm doing in the morning, because, some of those 3-minute bouts, I'm not just doing slow cardio. I'm doing some slight explosiveness, left and right and left and right. So I'm working those fast twitch muscle fibers, and I'm integrating all of the things. Like you could integrate strikes if you wanted to, which oftentimes I do. So I'm not just working those slow fibers, which I remember a buddy of ours, I won't mention his name, a long time ago, did many like years of bicycling and running and swimming. He was an elite level guy there, but he moved very slow. His muscles were very slow. He didn't seem to have a lot of explosiveness in his older age. And as you and I get older, man, that's one of the primary things we lose is that quick, explosive fiber movement and pure strength. So you have got to do speed related work within your ability to stay safe and not be injured.
Well, yeah, I was frustrated this Wednesday. We were doing PCC workouts coming around the barrel and having a hard time getting the optic where I wanted it. And I'm like, I need to ask Mike about this. What would he tell me? And I'm like, well, part of it is just, you're not doing enough. You're just not mounting a rifle enough to get it there every single time. And of course, putting it on a timer. Okay. Yeah. I was better than my training partner, but not by much. I should have been much, much better because I have much more time than him, because he's a little bit younger than me, but it's like, it's irrelevant. I just need to put in the work. And it just showed me I won't do it enough. And then I saw your video and I'm like, okay, I know what I need to do.
Yeah. Well, and one of the advantages of what I have here is I have my, as you know, I have my home gym. So all my equipment is in my gym, in my garage. So I have all these dry fire targets and different things. So I'm doing these, what I would call dry fire dance moves between my conditioning sets. And this is way before I even do my lifting. And I'm working like literally over and over and over again. And my training buddy is like, why are your transitions so fast? I'm like, because I do them every single morning, or almost every single morning, in my 3-minute window as either my rest set or my low intensity kind of cardio set. And but that's the advantage, if you're going to a local gym, that's an issue. So if you could set up some conditioning or something at the farm there, and then you integrate some of that firearm stuff, I'm telling you, it's amazing where it will take you. And like I said, you can also incorporate strikes. You can incorporate close range strikes with your SIRT pistol and work on your bob and that low position, and muzzle strikes and move offline. It's limitless. And I'm going to stop bantering. Two things. Number one, I see RA's comment on YouTube that says, I'm one of the few YouTubers that you respect. Thank you for saying that, RA, whoever you are. And number two, Rich, I think you're spot on. We've talked about nuclear war. We've talked about aliens. We've talked about the economy. You and Will talk about the economy all the time. And I find myself listening to some of our shows and your shows and getting stressed, going, what do I do? What can I do? What can I do? And I agree, man. Take care of your health, being fit for the fight, or fit it overall for your family, is critically important. Picking up your guns every once in a while, train with them. These are nothing new. These are things we talked about when we formed the American Warrior Society, but I'm happy that you're in the gym hard, man. It's good for you. You're gonna live longer now, bro.
That's the plan. Scott is on. Good morning. Scott says, hi guys. I am on life cycle right now, cooling down from the workout. God bless you, brother. Shane is on. Will Rhodes is on. John Shriver from Yukon, Oklahoma, just spent a night at the farm as he was passing through town.
Wow.
Glad to have you by. Scott says, dry fire between sets at 24-hour fitness is frowned upon. Yeah, they would freak out if I did that at Planet Fitness.
I agree. Although I will tell you, I was at a gym in Bismarck, North Dakota this last weekend. Family had an event, and it's called Los Compañes. Maybe I'm saying that wrong in Spanish, but it stands for the champions. And it's a chain of gyms that I think are up in like the North Dakota, Milwaukee, maybe that kind of area of the country. And this place was a beautifully clean, but very hardcore bodybuilding / iron gym. And they have a whole sprint area with this carpet. And, it was like a day pass. So if you're Los Compañes, if you hear that gym, join it, shout out to them, their owners. If you know them, tell them you heard about the American Warrior Show. But I would bet I could take my SIRT pistol at a minimum into their carpeted sprint area, Rich. And I could have said, hey, this is a training tool. Can I go use it? And they would have been like, yeah. I almost guarantee. And there's some gyms that if you show them, a non-firing SIRT trainer, I bet they would probably let you utilize those things in certain areas of the gyms, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, we were talking, we have been talking recently about doing a warrior camp. We haven't done one for years, since right before COVID. I think it was probably our last one. So we're talking about doing one, but really it comes down to, you were mentioning gyms, and it reminded me of just the silliness at ranges. I got a fantastic range here in town. The city bought it. They spent millions on it, but they're letting a guy who's a trap and skeet guy run it. Well, the pistol and rifle bays, the guy doesn't comprende what the hell we're doing over there. So there's some guy like me and Kevin are training because he's going off to the DOE FIDC course. And so we're getting him spun back up. And they're like, you're not supposed to rapid fire here. I'm like, it's not rapid fire, bro. That's 2 well-aimed shots. I think there's a misunderstanding on a lot of these ranges. And it's like, well, you can't, is that an AR? I'm like, it's a PCC. What's that? Pistol caliber carbine? It says on this sign here that I can shoot that here. Yeah, but it looks like an AR. So I'm not comfortable with that. It's just,
it is amazing how little some ranges know about shooting. Like, you're a shooting range. And first of all, what rapid fire, what is that and how is that unsafe? Tell me how that's unsafe. Now, someone may say, well, if you're rapid firing and the gun is recoiling real fast and it goes up and recoils and hits the ceiling, totally agree with that. That might be considered unsafe. But in that case, you're violating all kinds of rules anyways. So if you're firing a single round at a time and you don't have the ability to control your firearm to the point where it recoils into the ceiling, guess what? There, Mr. Range Owner, kick that person off your range or get them some training. So there's so many things we can do better than that. So, Rich, this has been a great show so far, but should we talk about optics?
Yeah. I'm sorry, we're 16 minutes in. Ain't got there yet.
I love it. That's okay, man. This is good. This is how our old school shows used to be. So, I want to introduce a few things that I see in classes, and also from not just a technique standpoint, but from a context standpoint, like meaning why people carry a handgun with an optic on it. So here, let's get the first one out of the bag. So when I ask people, why are you carrying with an optic on your handgun? This is not a competitive shooter. Let's say this is a defender, civilian defender that has decided they're going to put an optic on their handgun, which I literally hear it all the time, because I think almost everybody's going to have optics on handguns in the next 3 or 4 years. I predicted this like 12 years ago in an article, PDN article, and it's come true. I actually had a 2-part article. So the answer is, Rich, well, my eyes are failing. I don't have the ability to focus on the front sight. So I need to put an optic on my handgun, right? So we may say, well, let's think that through from a logical perspective. Number one, is that necessarily true? Yes, it is true. Their eyes are probably failing. I myself can take this iron-sighted handgun and I can focus on the front sight, but it's a blurry blob, right? And I've purposefully ignored reading glasses for the last several years because I continue to try to work those muscles that flex that lens in my eye as much as possible, because once you start using them, if I use them for several hours and go back, it's really bad. But the point is, let's say that is a true statement, but it's not a fact in terms of shooting that the front sight has to be crystal clear. So let's define the context of the situation most of these people are in. Number one, they're in a fight at a distance where statistics say they're going to be between 0 yards. Let's put this in distance of yards for a second. 0 to 5 yards. 0 to 5 yards. Now, a 5-yard, 15-foot fight with a handgun is actually quite a long distance for about 98% of all shootings that occur, self-defense related shootings. So the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, if we put an optic on a handgun because we can't clearly focus on the front sight, is that relevant if we're fighting from 0 to 5 yards? And I would submit to you, it is not. We do not need a clear front sight focus at 0 to 5 yards. As a matter of fact, we don't need any focus at all on the sights in most cases from 0 to 5 yards. When I say focus, I mean clarity of our vision, where we take our eye, we flex the lens, and we can actually look at the details of the front sight, right? In theory, in the rear sight notch. We, with a completely blurry sight picture, or let me throw this out there, no sights on the handgun at all, but utilizing the handgun like you would point your finger, can successfully hit a silhouette-sized target in the center of the chest almost every time if we're not moving the gun without sights, Rich. If we're not moving the gun without sights. So the fact that people decide they're going to select and put an optic on a handgun because they can't focus on the front sight fails all of the realistic questions on, well, why are you putting an optic on your handgun? Well, I can't focus on the front sight. Well, you're probably going to defend yourself from 0 to 5 yards. Now, if someone said, well, I'm going to be honest with you, I can't focus on the front sight, and I know for a fact I could just point shoot at those distances. When I say point, I'm talking about pointing the slide of the handgun and using it as a visual reference, not randomly point shoot and hope it all works out. But if they said to me, and they continue the conversation and said, but you know what, if I had to take a shot, at 7 or 8 yards, and I live on a ranch, and oftentimes we'll have predators out there, or I may have someone on the outer edges of my yard, and I've got a really big yard, and I know for a fact I cannot hit at that distance. And Rich, I'm willing to select a great optic. I'm willing to equip it and mount it to my handgun properly, replace the battery every 3 to 6 months, and train with it almost on a daily basis. Then I would buy the I can't focus on my front sight discussion.
I'd just a couple things here. I don't run an optic on. I played with it years and years ago. It didn't work for me. But I approached it the same thing. My eyes failed. I'm a little bit older than you, so they failed a couple of years before yours did. But I found, like you said, these more of a target focus shooting kind of works out a lot of that issue. And then I have shooting glasses that have top bifocals and stuff like that. But where I'm going with this is, took a class from Simon Golub a few months ago. Me and Justin Carroll were the only students that were running iron sights. And we hung with everybody until there was a couple of drills that were from the 20-yard line, 25-yard line. And then there it was like, they still maintain these really tight groups where ours opened up. I mean, we're still well in the black of a B8 target, but it was noticeable who had iron sights. Is there any workaround on that, or is it just one of those limitations there?
No, and here's the deal. And by the way, I see, hey, Dot Gun is on right now. Looks like Dot Gun is on YouTube. He's actually an avid poster on Live Fire. So hi, Dot Gun. I see you on the app, and a bunch of other folks. Welcome to the show, folks. If you haven't shared it or whatever else, please give a share. But in terms of the workaround, Rich, so here's the bottom line. Like, again, I'll give you a great example from the competitive standpoint. This last year, I trained almost exclusively in the carry optics division. It's what most of my clients in the different organizations that I'm working with are shooting right now. It's what everybody's carrying. It's what everybody's coming to class with. It's what almost everybody's competing with. Like literally, I think in the Area 4 Championship recently here in Texas, I don't know how many people, but in the carry optics and limited optics divisions, out of all of the entries, I think those two divisions made up about 85 or 90% of the entries, all optics, right?
Wow.
So, but I train for a long period of time because I like it better. It's easier for me to shoot. I don't have to wear any shooting glasses, because to perform at a very high level with my iron sights, I have to wear some correction. So you're exactly right. At those distances beyond 10 yards. So if I want to take a precise shot, let's say a headshot on a U.S.A target 10 yards and out, or a body shot that I guarantee is an A zone hit at 25 yards, I have to have some correction. Now, granted, I can still do it with my level of visual focus. My eyes probably aren't quite as bad as yours, mainly because I've literally been fighting the reading glasses, and I haven't let some of those muscles, which eventually will not be able to win out. This is a losing battle for me. I get it. But the bottom line is there's no equalizer. And I had a buddy recently that switched from carry optics back to production for a match. And I switched from carry optics to single stack for the IDPA Nationals. And it's just harder. It's just harder to hit at long distances. There is no equalizer. There's no fixing that. That's why if you look at the mainstream agencies out there and groups that are switching from an iron-sighted platform to optics, their qualification scores are all going up. And their qualification scores, if you look at them, are going up from the 10-yard line and out, probably closer to from the 15. So a lot of those agencies and groups have a 15-yard stage of fire and a 25-yard stage of fire or more. They're crushing those areas because the dot is simply easier to aim with at that distance, assuming it's zeroed.
Can we, we're 25 minutes in, but if I were to do the old T close on, the pros and cons. There is a lot of cons to me with a red dot, carrying a red dot, not competing with a red dot, but carrying a red dot. When I did, at the end of the day of wearing the gun.
You paused for just a second. You said when I did, and then you paused the video. Say it again. So when you
I did wear, I did carry a red dot all the time, and it's in, I'm carrying it concealed, so my cotton is rubbing on the gun, and it's the little fibers. And when I draw the handgun at the end of the day, I'm like, damn, I got to clean this thing almost every single day. So it's moisture, it's rain, there's the optic could fail. I mean, there's a lot of things that are negatives. There's a few things that are very positive. We talked about one of them. The most important thing probably is being able to precisely put the bullet where you want it to go. But as far as the downsides for carrying an optic, what are those, Mike?
Man, I hate to say this. I'm not opposed to optic. I'm not opposed to carrying a gun with an optic. This is my current carry gun. I won't take it out of the holster because it's hot, it's loaded. So I'll follow my dry fire and my gun handling rules here in the studio. But the bottom line is they are many, assuming you don't. We're talking about downsides. The downsides are many if you don't follow certain procedures for carrying with a dot. Number one, like I said, and we'll talk about this next, is you have it mounted properly. Replace the battery on a regular basis. Have a set of either backup iron sights or front sight at a minimum, or the ability to utilize the window of your optic to aim it at closer distances. We can talk about that as well, because that's one of the fallacies I see in classes. But there are, believe it or not, if we're talking about the average civilian defender that is unwilling to put a lot of training time in. And when you say, well, Mike, how much is a lot of training time? If you're not willing to handle your carry gun almost every day for several minutes at a minimum, working your presentation skills, two-handed, strong-handed, and support-handed, right? Or off-balancing, leaning left and right around a theoretical position of cover, then you are not handling your gun enough to carry the gun with an optic, right? And when I say that, let's define that. So I'm holding in front of the camera. If you can't see me, you're listening to the show right now. 2 CERT demonstration tools, Glock 19 configurations. One has iron sights, one has an optic on it. So when we take these 2 guns and we contrast what the problem is in terms of the optic, we may say, well, a lot of shooters will say, well, Mike, I have trouble finding my dot sometimes. Well, then I would say, well, why don't you have trouble finding your front sight or your sights when you're shooting an iron sighted handgun? And the reason is because the iron sights are always in your vision, right? So they're always in the vision in some way, shape, or manner. So you could see if that the slide is up, down, left, or right, or the iron sight is way out of place. You can see that and fix that right away. Where with an optically sighted handgun, once the optic is in front of your face and the dot is on target, like right now, the dot is on target, and I'm gonna try to stay close to the microphone here, right? And if I move the gun just a little bit left or right, I'm talking about less movement than you could probably actually see on the camera. I demonstrated this the other day in a live show on live fire. You'll lose the dot, right? So what a lot of people default to then is, and I hear this all the time, Rich, is like, well, I just use my iron sight, my backup iron sights on my optic gun to get me onto the dot. I'm like, well, aside from the fact that you may be shooting a 20 or 30-yard shot now, why are you carrying with an optic in the first place? Just use iron sights. Because like I said, if I had to put a specific number on it, I would say 15 yards and farther. Rich, do you know how many people engage someone that are civilian defenders, or we could probably include law enforcement, but they may engage people that distance, but it's so rare. Like I'm talking
statistically zero.
I would say it's less than 1% of all of the encounters that happen, right? So it's so low. I would ask them, well, if you're using your iron sights to find your dot anyways, why not just use iron sights? It solves all of your problems. Now, I love optics. I love shooting them. They're easier for me, but I spend on a daily basis, I put the gun in front of my face. If I weren't Mike Seeklander, pro shooter, and I carried with an optic, I would still do that. in a safe manner, whether that means you completely unload or you have a safe backstop and you just present the gun. I'm not telling you to dry fire with a loaded gun, but you understand what I'm saying. When you draw and you holster your carry gun and put it in your safe, there's a loaded gun on in your hand. So be responsible. But the bottom line is, if you're willing to do that, I would buy it. But there's so many downsides to that optic. You got to think those through and make a conscious decision to overcome those things. Then we're on a path toward selecting the right optic, mounting it properly, and training with it for the realistic person, which we could talk about next, that makes sense.
You've mentioned a couple times mounting it properly. Can you speak more to that?
So let me show you another firearm here. So this is actually one of the new C&H DMOs. So this is a Glock DMO, and this is not a stamp of approval necessarily for C&H, although they're a great company and I've had good success with most of their optics. I've had, by the way, we're talking about optics. I have most companies that make optics. I've had a problem or a failure at some point in my career. There are some exceptions out there, but there are also optics I've shot a little less than others. But this is what I would call a direct mount optic. So if we look at the history of optics on handguns, what you'll see historically, and I'm not talking about open guns where they're frame mounted optics. I'm talking about slide mounted optics. Historically, the original versions that we saw were a plate that oftentimes was mounted in the rear sight dovetail that we would mount an optic on. And oftentimes that would be both weak because, we're talking about a plate that flexes and it's in the dovetail of the firearm, and it offsets the optic significantly higher than the front and rear sight. So your goal, in theory, should be to have an optic mounted where the dot in the optic, if you measured where the dot is, it should be about right on top of the front sight and the rear sight. If you can see the video right now, that's what I'm showing. This direct mounted optic fits so low in the Glock MOS groove, the dot itself is literally right on top of the front sight. So if the dot itself is literally right on top of the front sight, that means when I present the handgun, it's going to be at the exact same height it would have been with iron sights. So there's no physical change in the gun position that I have to relearn. So that's number one as far as mounting. Eliminate the rear sight notch plates exclusively if you can. They're just not worth it with what we have in terms of both slide mounted optics. The second thing is, if you can get a direct mount optic, that's always going to be better than a plated optic because the plate adds, whatever it would be. It wouldn't be a quarter or even an eighth of an inch, maybe a 16th of an inch, maybe a 32nd of an inch of additional height on the optic itself. And also the direct mount optics that are directly screwed in, and they're probably milled into the slide. So there's an edge of material in front and behind the optic. So there's not just the screws themselves carrying the force of the recoil as the slide recoils, because it's putting a bunch of G forces on that optic, and that's the way you want to lean toward if you possibly can.
Yeah, Ben. I want to look at something real quick because this is my carry gun. It's cleared. I cleared it before I brought it on. I have weapon mounted light, no optic, weapon mounted light. This is to me, back when you and I were cops, I would have given anything for this right here. So on your carry gun, you don't run a weapon mounted light. If it's one or the other, I would take the light over the optic. I think the light solves more problems than the optic does. That's just my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a great question. If I had to pick between an optic or a weapon mounted light, I think for most people, probably the right weapon mounted light. And we're going to say lighting and shooting with lights and weapon mounted lights.
Yeah.
But I'll give you a tidbit. I think it presents not as many problems. It presents some of the same problems as an optic. So I see a lot of folks I got a weapon mounted light. I got this really cool weapon mounted light on my handgun. And I'll give you a great example. The stream light of the Surefire weapon mounted lights that have the flip lever or the throw lever, right? So on the left side, typically, you would push it down with your left thumb. On the right side, in theory, I think you could flip it up or down with your right side. So what oftentimes I ask is, well, how do you activate your weapon mounted light? Well, I activate it with my left thumb for a right-handed shooter. And I say, okay, if you're going to shoot with one hand, come out of the holster dynamically and shoot with one hand because the other hand's already injured. How are you going to activate your light? And they go, what? Say what? What are you talking about, man? Because they never thought about that. And when I do this on a range with some very skilled guys, and they're like, they tend to be kind of lost in space for just a moment of time before they activate the light. So if I saw your gun properly, you probably have a TLR7 without the grip activation switch. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay, so you have a small button on the side of your light. So what your practice methodology might be drawing the handgun out of the holster, maybe activating with your microphone, guys. Sorry, folks. Activating with your thumb, and then the light stays on. Or maybe even in a situation where you're searching the farm on the yard, you come out of the holster and you're outside. In a lot of cases, I would tell the average user that doesn't spend a lot of time doing it, just turn the light on the gun.
Yeah.
Just turn the light on and move around. But that also presents a problem that now you're searching with the muzzle of the gun, and which people tend to default to searching with the handle of the light. So the light offers some of the problems that the optic does if you're not selecting the right light and you're not training with it like you should. And it doesn't take a lot. It's like the optic. You could spend a few minutes a day activating your light, drawing and activating your light, using your left hand and your right hand, and getting, maybe grabbing a cert trainer and mounting a light like it to that, and searching your house and having your kids hide. There's a lot of value in that. Never having to go to the range. You don't have to worry about that. So and I think we'll do an exclusive kind of up your game, maybe low light show in the future anyway. So.
But since we are, and I agree with you, I think the low light is its own show. However, since we are talking about optics and integrating the light on the gun, so specifically a weapon mounted light on a gun that has an optic on it, what, if anything, are some good things and bad things?
Well, so you're talking about if the weapon has a weapon mounted light and an optic.
Yeah. So I got this and a holosun or something on top.
So all good, but we want to be very, very cautious that, and let's talk about protocol with a weapon mounted light. So we want to select a direct mounted optic. We want to have one that has a big and bright enough dot to see, and we want to turn it up. Most folks, and I've shot with a lot of shooters. A lot of them, maybe some of them come from a military background, or maybe a background where they shot ARs, and they turn the dot down on the AR to be very precise with that dot. With an optic on a handgun, we probably actually want to do the opposite. We want to crank it literally to its highest setting, and then probably down 3 to 4 clicks or pushes of the button or whatever else. So we have a pretty bright, big bright dot to find very quickly in all light conditions. Because what I don't want to have is a dim dot, and then I go out there in a bright sunny day and I draw it and I can't find my dot, right? At the same time, I don't want it so bright in a kind of a slightly dark room, or maybe my yard, where it washes out and it kind of suns out or stars out or whatever that would be called. So, but if you're carrying with a weapon mounted light, keep in mind, a good weapon mounted light probably has 300, 400, 500 lumens. So you want to have if your optic allows for manual adjustment, you want to have it on manual adjustment, not auto adjustment. I do not want my optic deciding how bright the dot goes when I draw it in a dynamic situation. I want the dot turned nice and bright and to stay at 1 power. But you're gonna want to go into a room and illuminate and turn your weapon mounted light on and make sure that you can still see your optic. But if you followed the rule of crank it all the way up and then down several notches so it's bright during a sunny day, you're going to be perfectly okay with a weapon mounted light. So there's no downside there as long as you set it up properly.
Okay. So we talked about that. We talked about mounting. What else do you want to talk about, Mike?
Well, let me add one more thing on low light, and then we'll
Yeah.
talk about actually using the optic. So if you carry a handheld flashlight like I do, one of the things you're going to want to be cautious of, especially if you're using an eye index technique, or, I would not recommend necessarily a chin or a neck index because that shadows the target area. But an eye index technique that would work with iron sights, and I know the light is near my head. We're going to talk about that in a different show. There are options. A lot of that light, when I activate it, will actually potentially wash back and reflect back from the lens itself. So there's some reflection issues there. Be aware of that. So I may change my handheld light position with an optic. So be aware of that with a handheld light that's really, really bright, which your handheld light should be bright. You may have some washback issues, and you may have to change your shooting position slightly for low light, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. So we talked about mounting. We talked about low light with an optic. Are there any other considerations like environmental considerations or where you live considerations relative to the red dot? I'm thinking about hot and cold areas. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, man. I think that number one, I have not experimented a lot with an optic on a gun in extreme cold weather, but I distinctly remember Fairbanks, Alaska. A buddy of mine would bring me up every year, and I would teach a class up there, and we talked about his rifle optics in their winters. So he said, "Well, I got my truck gun. It's got a EOTech on it with these rubber switches." He said, "Mike, when it hits 20 below in Fairbanks, when you go out there, sometimes the optic's not there at all. The batteries just completely fall apart. They don't run well. But number two, the plastic switches and everything on them freeze. So literally, you can't adjust the optic." Now let's talk about someone maybe in law enforcement or a civilian operator that is maybe holstered, you're not concealed now, and you're in very cold conditions like North Dakota. So you're in this coffee shop in North Dakota and you're drinking your coffee and it's 30 below outside and your optic is nice and warm, right? And it's probably got some condensation on it or whatever else, vice versa. And you go outside and draw that handgun and start to do a search around a building because there's an active shooter or something weird going on in your property or the place. There's a very good chance that then that warm optic will have some immediate fogging or condensation. So I think we should probably be aware of that. And I think vice versa could be the case as well. A very, very cold optic that's outside and on an outside the waistband holster, or maybe it's not warmed by your body, or maybe you keep it in your vehicle and it wasn't on your body, and then you go into a warm environment. So also, I think that in optics, I've seen like, South Carolina and places that have just ridiculous humidity. My lenses on my optics, even though a lot of times they have anti-fog kind of properties, will fog up. It's like your shooting glasses will fog up in different places that you never really experienced before. So certainly be aware of the environmental factors as well.
Yeah, Johnny King says from air conditioning to a humid outside temperature, the lenses will fog up. I use a product called Cat Crap to eliminate fogging.
Cat crop is amazing. Had some of it a long time ago, and I've heard about it time and time again. I need to get some more of that. So Johnny's
Okay,
exact.
let's talk about rain because obviously, when you're teaching with optics, you can't really determine what the weather's going to be. So, how do they handle rain? Is that something that a closed emitter just solves, or not so much?
So let's define optics. When you're a closed emitter is one where there's two windows on the optic, which means the emitter, which emits the red little laser, I guess it is, onto the window of the optic, is enclosed. An open emitter is open. I mean, it's protected, but it's open, meaning there's not glass in front of it. Now, let's talk about closed emitter first. Closed emitter is all fine. It's awesome, but I will tell you, I've seen closed emitters on some major manufacturers' products recently get some fogging inside of it. So some condensation or a molecule of water got inside there and caused some fogging of the actual lens inside the optic itself. So it helps, but I don't know if it solves the problem. Another thing on a closed emitter, it's probably a bigger, blockier optic. So it's heavier. And you can feel the difference on the slide if you pay attention to it. So I really want the lightest optic I can possibly put on the slide. And I'm not saying closed emitters are bad. I'm just saying be aware of that. Now, an open emitter, like if it rains or you get water on it, is that the end of the world? And the reality is, no, it's not. What oftentimes I'll do in one of my optics classes is I'll take a spray bottle of water at one point in time and I'll walk down the line with each individual and I'll spray their optic full of water. And as they're training this specific drill, and they'll aim and they'll get some foggy weirdness in the optic, they'll probably still be able to see their dot, and they'll fire one shot and those little droplets of water will just burst in the air. They'll disappear almost exclusively. And you still get some weird deflections of the water in the lens, but it's not a big deal after you fire that first shot. And which leads me to the training protocols that we want to talk about is utilizing and understanding, Rich, the strengths of the window of the optic, the entire housing in the window as an aiming tool, right? And then one of the things I see my students fail to do all the time when we're talking about the 10-yard target and in, when I have them draw and fire or extend and fire or transition the gun laterally and fire, like there's a threat to the left or to the right, is they fire very slowly because they take all of the time in the world to find the dot. When in reality, at a 3 or 4 or 5 yard target, which is probably highly likely to be the distance we're going to be fighting at as a civilian defender, or even in most law enforcement settings, the window of the optic is the aiming tool I'm utilizing to get me onto the target quickly. So what oftentimes I'll do, and you got to try this, folks, is turn the dot off in your optic and present the handgun. Start from a compressed position, contact the trigger guard, extend on what I call my extend, prep, and press drill, extend and center the target in the center of the window. So if you want to hit a guy on the high center chest, or if you're shooting at the IDPA target, you want to center the 0 area in the center of your window. Present the gun like you always would. Don't even think about it. Just present the gun fully, center the target in the center of the window, and 3 yards, 4 yards, 5 yards, 6 yards, every single time you're going to hit the target. Probably somewhat centered if you have a decent presentation. If you don't have a good enough presentation to do that, that tells me your gun presentation itself is an issue and you don't practice any presentations. You don't do that with your firearm without the dot at all. Like off, I will always turn my dot off for guys. I'll say, here, look at this. They're like, well, there's no dot. I'm like, okay, watch this. Beep, boop, and there's center shot. Boom, same time. Actually, the time, Rich, is faster because I'm not taking the time to find the dot and stabilize the dot. My brain is no longer tied to that aiming process because it's utilizing the window to aim the gun. And it's very, very fast. That's how I build speed on all of my handgun transitions and all my PCC transitions. Shouldn't be saying this on the show out loud, getting the secret out. I'm using the window to get me on target very quickly. And the dot oftentimes is right there if I need it at all.
Yeah, you had us do that with a rifle one time, and we were doing running drills. Like, I don't know, we were running 100 yards, no red dot on the rifle. And the first time I did it, I'm like, well, this is going to be a complete crap show. And we went down and looked at the target, and they were all zero down hits. And I was just like, what? And I guess it makes sense if you zeroed the optic correctly, and it was right in the center of the window, and you're using the window just like you described. You're going to shoot better than you think you will.
Well, and if you talk about the PCC and the rifle, remember that the cheek weld is the great equalizer. So if we worked hard on our cheek weld and the dot in our optic taught us where a good cheek weld was. So when we bring the gun up, the optic is centered and the dot is probably centered, whatever in the window. Well, then when we turn the dot off, if we build that same cheek weld and then we're looking through the optic and the target is centered in that optic window, you're going to be surprisingly accurate with that gun. I was beating a guy the other day on transitions, and he's like, how you does? Because I'm just driving the window over there, and when my target, like the camera, is centered in the window, boom, I'm firing my shot, boom. And I said, I'm not even waiting for the dot. I don't need the dot. I have a good cheek weld on the gun, so I know exactly where it is. Now,
and you're not moving the gun during the firing process either.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Right, exactly.
Yeah. So to me, and I'll get this out. I'm not poo-pooing on optics. If you carry an optic, I think that's fantastic. Go with God and hasta luego. To me, the dot is a solution in search of a problem. So the problem that it solves is, like you said, at distances 10, 15 yards and greater, you're going to have much better hits. But for an average CCW guy or gal, it's going to create a plethora of problems for you just as a daily carry option that I just don't see the average American putting in the level of training and proficiency to be able to carry it. I think they're carrying it because it's the thing to do right now. And they're not going to put the time and attention into it to get where they need to be. And I apologize if I'm offending anyone, but that's just what my limited experience is telling me.
I don't think it's offensive. I think it's 100% true. And my test is, presentation speed from a two-handed position, and then a one-handed position, and then a support hand. And I know we're much less likely to have to fight with our support hand. Strong hand, not so much, because if you decide to pull out your carry light and you're searching, or you're holding someone or something, or you've got a steering wheel, there's a lot of reasons why we might shoot with strong hand only. But the position of the arm is different in front of our face. So that's the test. If I have someone that can very quickly find their dot, present the handgun, two-handed, find your dot, one-handed, find your dot, support-handed, find your dot. And I know two-handed is going to be the fastest, strong hand is going to be the second fastest, support hand is going to be the third fastest. And then maybe I put them off balance left and right, which I call positional speed. If they can find their dot there, that tells me they practice their presentation. And people may say, well, how do you practice it? That's literally just do that. Just grab your carry gun, unload it, and do 10 two-handed presentations toward a spot on the wall, maybe 6 or 7 yards away. Center a light switch. Once you center the light switch in the window, you'll probably find your dot, make a slight correction, right? Then do it one-handed with your right hand. Then do it one-handed with your left hand. Then do it leaning to the right, rolling to the right as if you're leaning around a vehicle, and leaning to the left. If you do that every single day, and you use this window aiming technique that I'm talking about, I am certain you will be able to find your dot under some stress if you need your dot at all. And I'll tell you, we had a guy on the show a while back. I don't know if I'm not certain about this, but Brian Costanza, multiple shootings. I think he's been in 7 or whatever shootings. State trooper, great guy. I think his last couple were with a handgun optic. I'm like, did you see your dot at all? No, I didn't need the dot. He was shooting a guy in a vehicle. He used the window to aim the gun. Now, the dot is a great training tool to teach you where the gun's pointed. So if you're like, well, Mike, how do I really refine my presentation to the very precise spot? Matter of fact, using an optic on a handgun might be a valuable training tool for iron sights. One of the pieces of advice I got from Todd Jarrett many years ago was shoot open for a while. It'll make you a better iron-sighted shooter. That was true because the dot showed me more of my movement errors and presentation errors and everything else. It showed me exactly where the gun was and where it was going when I was pulling the trigger. But just keep in mind that if someone commits to that time, they'll be fine.
Yeah, Dr. Gordon Botson is on. Good morning, sir. He says, excepting present company, the majority of citizens who carry don't train enough to be really good with any aiming system. And I agree with you. But let's talk about height over bore, because with a rifle and a red dot, your height over bore with that red dot is, I don't know, 2, 3, 4. Some of them are running really crazy high mounts. And, when you're going around cover, that presents a problem. Is there any, and with this, my height over bore is what, a quarter of an inch, half an inch of that. Is there anything that, oopsies, is there anything that I need to consider when it comes to height over bore with a red dot, shooting around cover, for example?
Not really. And by the way, I see Gilly's question about the laser, Gyal's question about the laser. We'll talk about that here in just a second. It's kind of off subject, but so if you look at the direct mount optic, I don't know if you could see on this video, like if you could see, if you're just listening right now, what I have is once again the DMO made by CNH mounted on a Glock in the MOS slot. So the center of the dot is the center of the window, right? So if I take my finger and put it on the rear sight and kind of line it up with the center of the window, you can see the dot is about the same height as the tip of the front sight of the top of the rear sight. So if you have a direct mounted, low mounted optic, the height over bore will be insignificantly different, meaning it will be like, I don't even know what the measurement will be, Rich, 1/80th of an inch more
Really? Okay.
or less, right? It would. Now, if I take the same and mount it up on the slide on a plate or in the dovetail, man, then I've raised it up a good quarter of an inch. And if you're maybe really trying to lean around or creep around cover, maybe that might be an issue. Maybe it might be an issue. It's certainly something to consider. Where with the rifle, we're talking about, a good, inch to inch and a half height over bore. So it's completely different than way less than a quarter of an inch difference.
Mm-hmm. So a handgun, it's not negligible to really don't have to, but with a rifle, obviously you got to consider that.
Yeah, negligible. So let's talk about lasers. So
yeah,
do lasers offer the same advantage as an optic? Yes, potentially. If you have the right laser and you count on that gear, and that's the reason I say that is because I've seen lots of lasers fail as well. The laser may offer a sighted advantage that the optics don't, and that you could be in a really weird position with a laser sighted handgun, and the gun doesn't even have to be in front of your face now, and you know exactly where it's pointed. But I have seen shooters that rely on lasers on carry guns, and they draw the handgun out or go to use the handgun, And just like the guys with the dot lasso, they're like, they're running the gun in circles trying to find the laser, because all of a sudden their brain says, there's no laser, I can't shoot. There's no laser, I can't shoot. And they forgot that they have iron sights on the gun. So be real careful with the laser. I tell people that utilize a laser. It's got to be high quality. It's got to work all the time. It's gear, it's battery operated, but you need to shut it off sometimes or cover it up with a piece of tape, and utilize your iron sights as well. Figure out how to aim the gun without the laser, because I've literally seen students just stand there and do nothing because their brain tells them, just like with an optic, I can't shoot unless I see the dot. And that's not true.
Okay. We've talked about a lot of stuff this morning. Is there anything, I know that holsters now, a lot of them are coming already pre-cut for optics, but that can present a problem, I guess. Maybe not. What do you think?
Well, maybe. I think that as far as the optic, most of the holsters, like, Precision that we wear right now, probably has some sort of a cut or a method to allow. I have seen students, and this is about things I've seen on the range, where they're in the holster and they have no idea that they're not all the way in the holster, because their optic is hitting the edge of the front edge of the holster, and their holster needs to be cut down. So if you decide, hey, I'm going to mount an optic to the handgun, I'm going to try to carry with it, put it in your carry holster, and just make sure it goes all the way in, the trigger guard's fully enclosed, and it clicks into place, and be aware that if not, you may have to buy a different holster or modify your holster.
And that's exactly what I was getting, man. I could see like a quarter of an inch of the actual inside of the trigger. I'm like, that ain't gonna work, man.
That's not gonna work. Yeah, you're gonna have to modify and cut like this. My carry gun actually has a, basically a sweat kind of shield section that covers and actually prevents any actual sweat or more of the lint from actually getting inside the optic. But I can tell you, I can look inside my carry optic right now, my optic on my carry gun, and there is a small amount of lint and dust and whatever else, because it's like an open dish, so as that dust falls off your shirt and your body and whatever you're doing, it's going to collect. So on a regular basis, you got to take that thing out and clean it out, blow it out, or whatever else. With your carry gun, once again, in a safe manner. I'm not telling you to do it loaded, but if you do it loaded, do it safely. Before you carry out of the house, if you're not presenting and getting a sight picture like I would for load and make ready and IDPA, and seeing a good dot, fully bright, it's all working nice and clean before you carry out of the house, that's a problem. And I'm not saying to dry fire. I'll draw a couple times to check the dot, draw a couple times, check the dot again, safely holster, and I'm on my way.
I'm glad you said that, because I do the same thing. I got a giant oak tree right near my truck. So it's a backside. It's huge, right? It's hundreds of years old. It'd stop anything. It'd stop a tank round probably, and I'll present a couple times before I get in my truck on that tree. And I'm like, I don't know if this is a good practice, but I don't know. Maybe it is, because you're wearing different clothes. I want to think that, you and I have been carrying concealed for 30 years. And I want to think that my clothes are pretty concealed carry friendly, but every now and then, like this linen shirt is not. There's no stretch in this thing.
Yep.
So anyway,
well, I would suggest that probably some of them are not carry friendly, that have the different fibrous materials, like some of the, maybe a wool shirt or whatever else. You're going to just get more fibers inside your optic. It's going to happen. You're going to have stuff in your optic, especially with an open emitter sight. Like that's a small, whatever the RMR model is, that's what they put on that gun. There shouldn't be any reason at all why you're not, maybe when you're going from your safe to your carry holster, or wherever your gun is stored, doing a presentation. Oftentimes I'm, doing kind of a downward angle like we do in IDPA. Not near my feet, but downward, because there's no target area. There's nothing. My finger never enters the trigger guard,
right.
But I just do a couple presentations. Yep, I can see the dot. It's nice and clean. Got no lint, no water. My battery didn't die that night. Another thing a lot of times I'll do is, when I'm training or holstering for my carry gun, I'll just reach up and wiggle the optic, right? And I can't tell you, Rich, how many times I've found an optic on a both competition gun or whatever else that's got a little bit loose, right? Because the screws do come loose. The plating hardware comes loose. That happens. Your screws back out. You should have, if you're mounting an optic, if you have a plate, you should have co-witness screws in your plate. If you don't know what I mean by co-witness, maybe 2 little blue paint marks on the screws, and on your actual mounted screws, you should have co-witness marks as well. So you could just glance at those co-witness marks and see if your screws have backed out. And I'll maybe end with this because I know we're almost an hour into it. We should absolutely verify our zero. I've had several optics drift zero, but I just had one the other day that significantly drifted zero. I mean, it literally went from the point where I would aim, let's just say at the center of the A in the A zone on a U.S.A target, and it was hitting under the A zone. So it drifted and changed elevation by more than 8 inches. And every shot I fired after it started went farther and farther. So I don't know if the emitter got knocked loose inside the optic. First time it's ever happened to me. Kind of interesting.
We touched on zero, Mike, I think, and that's one thing we didn't talk about. Where are you zeroing your red dots on your handguns?
So the reality is I want to zero probably at 20 or 25 yards, but that's a long distance to get on paper and do a good zero. So do a good zero at 10 yards, solid zero at 10 yards, and then go back to 25 yards and verify that. So if I shoot a 25-yard zero with my handgun, I know I can shoot point aim, point impact at 25 yards. You say, well, Mike, why do you do that? Isn't the bullet going to be slightly low at 3 yards then, which is gunfighting distance? Yes, it's going to be slightly low, like maybe by at half an inch. But even at 3 yards, most people can't hold a half an inch, which means I could still put the dot in the center of the face nose area, and I'm still going to hit within a half an inch of that, all other things being equal. But I know the gun is zeroed at 25 yards. So if I have to use the optic for the purpose it's best at, longer range, precise shooting, which is pretty rare, but there have been some cases in the last several years of that happening, I know for a fact I have a good zero versus just getting a real good 7-yard zero or 10-yard zero and hoping for the best at 25 yards. So always think about verifying and making sure you have a very precise longer range zero, and then checking at closer distances.
All right, Mike. Well, a lot of good stuff to consider today, man. Really appreciate it. Appreciate you coming on your own show, Mike.
Yeah. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for having me on, man. Hey, folks, if you listen and you like the show, give it a share, give it a review, give it all that good stuff. Don't forget, we have a show notes page and a show website, AmericanWarriorshow.com. You can check out all of the sponsors on that show page. Also, Precision Holsters. I showed off my carry holster today. They're Ultra Appendix inside the waistband holster. By the way, Rich, they're redesigning that. I just got a new T&E version of that the other day. It's going to be pretty darn cool. They're all on our website. If you decide to carry a full-time weapon-mounted light like Rich Brown does, he may probably carrying out of a Works variant of a holster. Works, W-E-R-K-Z, with Shan out in Idaho, specializes in light-bearing holster solutions. So check them both out. But all the other sponsors, Rich, Mountain Man Medical and our friends out in Asheville, North Carolina, how'd they fare after that weather, by the way?
They're rebuilding, man. They got hit hard, and but they were also able to. This is the thing about Jesse. He's a retired Marine gunnery sergeant who runs Appalachian Standard, man. The guy just really stepped up and helped out the community and in some really significant ways. So follow them if you're not already on Facebook. Just wonderful people doing great things. And I also wanted to say something about Mountain Man Medical. Right now, we talked about at the beginning of the show, we're living in anxious times. Don't know what the economy is going to do. Don't know what the election is going to do. Guess what you can do? Right now, you can prepare. Now's the time to get your body and your fitness and your trauma preparedness where it needs to be. This is something that I had Justin on the show talking about being an EMT, and in a disaster like that, it's not coming. Well, if you have a co-branded trauma kit from Mountain Man Medical, click the links in the show notes. You can be ahead of the curve. So
cool. All right, folks. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. Get out there, train. Don't forget practice and all that stuff. And also, as a reminder, we talked about fitness in the front end of the show. Think about a lot of things are going on. Think about the things you can do and the things you can control. And I promise you, your fitness and your conditioning and taking care of your body and living healthier and longer and stronger, that's a win-win-win across the board. But that's all we have, folks. Make sure you're training because the fight is coming. Be ready.